Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host Greg Thompson and my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron, how we doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's good to be back here and back in the flow of where we were. We left off talking about draft stuff. We took the next week talk about the schedule. I've kind of been removed from the draft now for a week, so it's fun to this week prep for the show and get back into those prospects again because I feel like we just kind of jumped right through.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think there's so many people have kind of gone through, but I think it's worth taking a little bit of time to talk about the additions to the team and guys that are there. But yeah, it was weird switching gears into thinking about the season and the order of things and record predictions and stuff like that, and now going back to there's new guys that we just added to our team.
Yeah.
So tonight, that's what we're going to go through. We're going to go through the offensive draft picks who were added, a couple of the UDFAs that are there, and some of the best available free agents, the same that we did on the defensive side of the ball. So obviously, overall, we're talking about 3 offensive linemen and a receiver on the draft side. So from a total standpoint, I don't know that was far off what we expected. I had messed around and said at one point that I didn't know if we were going to add any skill position players, just because I didn't know if tight end or running back or receiver were going to be there, and not having one until the 6th round kind of checked out with where that was at. That obviously it wasn't a huge one. I did think we were going to see a big investment in the offensive line, but I certainly thought it was going to be on the interior. So, besides the individual names, were you surprised in the positions that were picked or the way that it was structured from a priority standpoint and what that kind of tells as far as Bean's preferences?
Yeah, no, I think the only thing that was kind of surprised, I agree with you. The numbers are fine the way the draft goes, and you get 4 offensive players. I guess my only beef at the time of the draft was the 2 the 2 tackle taken, because you solidified that in free agency with Deion Dawkins, with Darrell Williams. You sort of solidified that for a few years, but the logic makes sense to get one of those guys. I was totally fine with that at 30 if the board fell that way where
Sure.
Tevin Jenkins was there, and I would have been fine with taking him there. So it's not that tackle wasn't a need. I saw guard as a higher priority need, and there was a few times where they had opportunities to take a guard there. In that 2nd round, I think even in the 3rd round, there were some guards I had available there, but they were totally fine to take the traits, the big time traits, and that skyrockets up their board, and so they went with the trades. And I think this is taking the 2 tackles really speaks to Brandon Bean's, what people think is coach speak in generic GM speak, where he talks about the board. I don't think they went into the draft going, we really want to attack the tackle. Like, maybe they want to walk away with one potential swing tackle, but I don't think they were saying we want to load up the tackle room with freak athletes. That's just how the board fell. So I think, if anything, it just speaks to that. He's being honest when he says that he's going off the board and not just drafting for a need, because you didn't need 2. I hope it works out where 2 of them are good, and we can have 2 good future tackles also. But it speaks to Brandon Bean really just working within his board.
Yeah, anyone who ever wants to question, does he really mean it when he says best player available? He just went back-to-back defensive end and back-to-back offensive tackle on the first 4 picks. Yeah. You can't have a more direct example of him being true to best player available.
Especially with cornerback. Like, he didn't deny that cornerback wasn't a need. He said maybe not
just
as big
of
a
need.
Up. It just didn't line up, and that the board lined up where they were able to double up at positions that weren't as important at that point as getting a cornerback, I would think.
Sure, and even we talked about it on the defensive show where there's some layering with guys like Rousseau and Basham that they could have slightly different roles, and I could see it in how they play. I even could have seen it if it was Tevin Jenkins and Spencer Brown, where Jenkins, some people talked about that, like, hey, could he kick inside? Might he be a guard? We picked 2 6'8", 320-pound guys with 34-inch arms.
Right.
We picked tackles. Like, they are offensive tackles. There is virtually no scenario where they're going to be a guard. And, let's get right into it. I think that it's shocking, both you and I are fans of the relative athletic score, but always kind of temper, like, hey, it's a piece of the puzzle. It's good to show that they're athletic. It's interesting that out of every single offensive tackle since 1987, the Bills just selected the 12th and 1st most athletic tackles in history.
Mm-hmm.
and that includes insane size and reach as a part of that's included
Right.
in relative athletic score, the fact that they're 6'8", 320. It's interesting. I don't know if that means that they see them both as kind of high risk reward upside plays, and that, hey, maybe we don't know if both of them are going to work out, so we might as well take two shots at it so one of them works out. But
Right.
Spencer Brown out of Northern Iowa, a elite athlete, was actually like a 5-star basketball recruit and had never played offensive line, was a tight end in high school, but was mainly a basketball player for most of his life. And then, was a guy who was like 6'8", 220 and, playing basketball, and then slowly got bigger and bigger and bigger. And now I will say some of the clips that you see and some of the people that I trust, guys like Brandon Thorne and people like that he does have impressive bend for a guy who's 6'8". He can get down in his stance. He does use his leverage well, use his reach well. It's interesting. I mean, it certainly speaks to the upside that's possible. I think that some of the struggles that he had at the Senior Bowl, and then from everything I've heard, kind of recovered well and kind of redeemed himself well. I think that's what I see is a lot of potential. Some real potential, like I think real starting potential, not just like, hey, maybe upside. I think a real starting potential, but some risk, and nothing I want to see on an NFL field anytime soon.
Yeah, it's a project. I think that you're banking on the traits, and that's really what a lot of this draft was about. You take Basham out in those first 4 picks, you're banking on traits, and that guys are going to fill into these bodies, and that your coaches are going to be able to get a hold of things that you can't coach, right? You can't coach that type of size that a Spencer Brown has, and the type of athleticism that goes with that size. You talk about RAS. It really does show up for him, and it doesn't always show up for every player. Like
Correct.
Sometimes there's a difference between what you see in those scores versus what you see on the tape. But there is a little bit of, it's fun to watch this big, huge human being move and have some agility. And I love some of the clips that Eric put out there of him in space, just crushing dudes. And I have to disagree with you that he slowly put on weight. Northern Iowa, they put out some pictures from their strength, like when they got guys in to and then they would show when they were getting ready to go, and the strength and conditioning program that they have at Northern Iowa is fantastic. I know I'll try to find the tweet and retweet it later. The transformation of some of their players when they came in. I mean, he was a twig when he got there. He was just like a tall, like you said, a basketball player type guy. So he's still probably got some frame for himself to fill out a little bit. It's a super exciting prospect. I understand why there's fans rushing to say that he could be a starter and come in right away, because he's one of these guys that this is what's fun about the NFL draft, is finding these super athletic, super big, unique guys, especially once you get out of those first couple of rounds. Everything's less of a sure thing anyway. So if you can hit on some big potential guy, that's at least fun for the fan base, and it's an easy sell that there's some development to be had with this player. So it's a fun, exciting thing to see if Bobby Johnson can develop a special young tackle like that. And it could be a great insurance who knows what Darrell Williams is going to do in the next couple of years. It's good to have that type of insurance behind him. So I'm excited about Spencer Brown, but I want some fans probably to pump the brakes about where he's going to be for 2021 or even probably the next couple of years. I think the jump from a year off here this last year with COVID and just playing at Northern Iowa in general with the type of competition that you're playing with there, the transition to being an NFL offensive lineman. We saw Eric has a great thread of Bobby Johnson teaching or showing some of his teaching.
Coaching clinic. Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that doesn't happen at the college game that is going to be asked of these guys at the NFL game of how you work with your other offensive linemen. So these guys have to come in. They're going to learn. There's a great group of vets ahead of them. This is another good unit. We'll talk about some other units that are really good ones for the Bills because of the way the depth chart's out. There's a lot of good veteran leadership along this offensive line that these guys can come in and learn from. It's probably one of the better rooms in the league as far as veteran leadership guys that are all on the same page, or Dion, Feliciano, Mitch Morris. Like, that's a great group to pick their brains and learn how to be an offensive lineman in the NFL. So I'm excited about it. But I'm not expecting a lot out of this for the next couple of years. This is a tree you plant and come back to in a few years, and hopefully it's paid off.
Yeah, and I think you hear a lot of exciting names. Joe here throwing out Jason Peters. I've heard a lot throwing out, Armstead with the Saints, in that, yes, I don't deny that I see the similarities in elite athletes who kind of had to translate into offensive tackle after playing other positions and were able to do that relatively quickly because of their elite athleticism. They are also by far the exception to that. There's plenty
you don't hear
more.
about all the names of the guys that never.
Yeah, you guys remember Bruce Campbell, the guy who
Right.
blew up from Maryland, that the Raiders ended up picking way higher than they should have because he destroyed the combine and was the best athlete ever at offensive tackle, and he blew out. He never was any good. There's more of those than there are Terran Armsteads or Jason Peters, but I will say I like the idea that although he lost the season, he spent the entire season working with Joe Staley. I do like that. I think that was a smart way. I'm not saying Joe Staley is Jordan Palmer, but it's at least he was thinking like that's a smart plan to spend your time with a career technician.
You didn't come back out of shape.
Correct. And hell, if you watch his workout video, you're talking about the one, I didn't see the transformation one. I saw the one of him bench pressing 500 pounds. Like he didn't miss any workout days in going through there. So I'm intrigued. I know everybody, Wise here talking about it, everybody's excited about the tackle eligible and that he's Lee Smith but more athletic. Like that's fun. I don't, and honestly, I don't know that it's wrong. Like they might use
Bates
him.
almost got a couple.
Correct. They might use him as the tackle eligible sixth offensive lineman. They invested some things in him, and maybe that's a great role for him to get himself 50 snaps during the season and get on an NFL field. I hope we never need him for more than a sixth lineman and an extra guy on the field. But I'm intrigued by the pick. He's a guy that I did look at in the ramp up period. That it was an exciting player to look around, but I was still a little bit surprised with the pick. But at least I see the upside and the traits and the reason they liked him.
Yeah, and again, with both these guys, both the tackles, you don't need this to pan out, in my opinion. Like you want all your draft picks to pan out, but these ones. These are risks you can take on traits and the type of archetype you're necessarily looking for at a position. You don't need it to pan out. Like the Bills are going to be fine probably for the next 2 to 3 years at that position, barring injuries, obviously.
Sure.
If these guys are able to step in those scenarios, fantastic. But other than that, this is the perfect time to take a developmental prospect. Like I said, the people that are in that room, the lack of pressure for them to come in and immediately take these jobs or relieve the salary cap situation, there's no real pressure for that right now. People are happy with the line the way it is. I could see a scenario where Darrell Williams doesn't have the season he had a year ago and the fan base just starts clamoring for Spencer Brown, but I don't think you want it. I think this is a guy that it's not going to look pretty if he gets out there too soon, and you want to let him just continue to develop. And I don't know that there's ever been a better time for the Bills to develop offensive line than right now. I think I have some issues with the starting offensive line, but it's a fine NFL quality line.
And it's a deep line.
Yes, they can afford to develop.
Our ceiling isn't that high. We don't have... You can probably argue Dion is top 10 at his position, but it's not a slam dunk. He's in that range.
Sure.
Anybody else, maybe Morris is top 10 at center. I think that's probably reasonable. I don't know that we have anybody else, but I think we have 8, maybe 9 starting caliber guys who would be the low-end starter for a lot of offensive lines, and we're going to have 2 or 3 or 4 of those guys sitting the bench that are still good enough. So our safety net, our floor is pretty good. We just don't have a lot of upside, and we have a lot of guys who would be the 5th starter on a lot of lines. We just have 4 of them on the interior that would probably start for a lot of teams.
He was a PFF All-Pro.
He was an All-Pro halfway through half the season. He was. And legitimately was an All-Pro at one point.
He was playing well.
But yeah, it's interesting the way they go about that and how it was put together. And for anybody who saw me kind of melt down a little bit online after the Carlos Basham pick, and that I just couldn't process why they went back-to-back at pass rusher, when they went back-to-back at offensive tackle and picked Tommy Doyle in the 5th round, I literally said out loud, I give up. I give up. I don't know. I don't know why I spend this time doing draft work. I clearly don't understand what's going on or why we're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
I had no possible idea why they picked Tommy Doyle. I just didn't. And now I get the contract layering. We talked about it with Mario Addison and Jerry Hughes expiring. It makes sense that next year AJ Epinesa, Gregory Rousseau, and Carlos Basham are making less than $6 million combined. That's really smart. That's good planning. That makes sense. I kind of get it that having an offensive tackle either next year or more logically in 2023, you can walk away from Darrell Williams' deal with no hurt feelings, and then you have a rookie contract along with Deion Dawkins. That's smart. And I've now convinced myself and talked myself into the fact that taking 2 lottery tickets means maybe one of them works out if the other one doesn't. But, man, Hamza Nasruddin was still on the board. There were still players that I wanted. Yeah. There were still quarterbacks that I wanted. There were players that I thought could have made an impact that were on the board. And Doyle basically is 95% of Spencer Brown. He's the same thing. He's 6'8". He's 320. He's the 12th best RAS score in history, but went to a small school and missed most of 2020. The MAC played 3 games. Right. I guess 3 is more than none, but played at a small school, super long, super athletic, was a hockey player instead of a basketball player, and then converted over to tackle. Had never played offensive line in high school, just like Spencer Brown, converted over from defensive end. It's the same player. It's just he's kind of the slight discount, the 5th round version of Spencer Brown. I was flabbergasted that they did it back-to-back picks, and true to your board, best player available, all those cliches. It's certainly true, but I struggled to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, it was tough for me just because of, again, you kind of nailed it, that the sort of I give up. None of us really know what we're doing with this stuff, and I say it every year, but then I like
to think I could predict something.
Sure, and I buy into my own bullshit, and I get married to players and ideas of what I think that this team wants, and then Brandon Beane goes and does something the way they drafted this year and just totally blows that up. But I think part of that is it is a back-to-back pick, but you didn't have the 4th round pick, so you had a whole lot of time. And then again, I think it just speaks to them staying with their board, and I don't know how their board's set up where, I would have had some probably discretion with my board and saying, okay, I'll stick to my board, but I'm not going to maybe take 2 tackles, like in this drive, even if the board's telling me to, like I might go for some other position in need. But then, you know what, dude, I say that. And, another part of this exercise for these shows that we're doing is looking ahead at some of the free agency. And I look at this roster and I know there's some need for the future that we got to develop in coming up here. But I look at this roster and say, for 2021, I don't know that I needed a whole lot of other needs that you won't be able to address in the plethora of ways there are a way to add talent around the NFL, whether it's the tryouts going on throughout now, people getting cut, next year's draft. There's so many ways to add talent over the next couple of years that you can, I guess, afford to do this. You've created, this is what Brandon Beane has done for himself in raising the floor, or maintaining the floor of who they were in 2020 through free agency, bringing guys back, filling voids of a John Brown with an Emmanuel Sanders type role. You've kept that floor the same, which allows you, I think, to do something like take 2 tackles, take 2 edge players, because really you've eliminated a lot of the holes that you would have otherwise had to fill.
Yeah, it's again, whether it's you're getting into contract layering, whether you're getting into any of the other pieces of it, it makes a lot of sense. And I think we've had some comments here about you saw what happened in the Super Bowl, whether you attribute that to the awesome defensive line of the Buccaneers or the lack of offensive line depth of the Chiefs. The Bills picked back-to-back defensive ends and offensive tackles, so it certainly maybe had some subconscious impact on Brandon Beane of, hey, we don't want to find ourselves in that position. And
I don't want to find the Bills in the way the KC's having to do it right now. Like, it's good for now. KC filled that line right now, but they filled it with aging vets that they're overpaying for past experience in some cases. Like, I don't know. They're going to have to patchwork now going forward, and if they don't draft well at that position and fill in that. I would rather draft and develop along the offensive line and continue to pay my own guys than have to go out in free agency all the time and try to trade for and pluck the top names in free agency to surround really your franchise. I mean, as much as they're paying Patrick Mahomes, man, they're going to have to protect him every single year. And I think they're in a worse position. I don't know if these picks will pan out for the Bills, but I think the logic in how you acquire the assets is a more sound way, knowing that you're going to have to pay Josh Allen all this money. You want to protect him with guys that you can bring in and control those costs to protect him.
Yeah, they certainly wish they had taken an offensive tackle instead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I can tell you that.
Sure.
When you get to the Super Bowl, to have the depth there, and it's the Chiefs are an elite team with an elite roster, but they are doing, like in fantasy football, people call it stars and scrubs. They are going with a all-flash, high-end starting lineup and some of the lesser depth in the NFL. And some seasons it pans out, and they've won the Super Bowl doing that. And some seasons it becomes the reason that you can't win because you don't have any depth. And I'm not saying that that's not right because they've been to 3 straight AFC Championship games and 2 Super Bowls in the last 3 years.
Sure.
They're obviously fantastic. But there are risks with that, and we saw the risks of it at the end of last year. So I don't know.
And there's risks the way the Bills are doing it, but
Correct.
it doesn't cost you as much
Yes.
when the risk
Yes.
fails.
And that's, it's different paths to similar things. They were the 2 best teams in the conference last year. They rightfully played in the conference championship game. And, there are different paths to do this. I think the Bills' path is more sustainable. I think that there's more higher likelihood of not having it crumble, but it doesn't mean it's the right path. So we go down that path again. I don't want to speak ill of Tommy Doyle. He seems like a really good dude. He made me laugh out loud when he signed his contract in full uniform with his helmet on and his elbow pads and everything, signing the contract. That's fun.
Right.
And I wasn't even being glib when I said about the 2 lottery tickets. That probably is right. Maybe Spencer Brown doesn't work out, but Tommy Doyle does. I don't know. I like the idea of taking upside chances at a valuable position that when Darrell Williams moved on, maybe now we have our starting tackle and our swing tackle on rookie contracts, and that's valuable.
Yeah. Or maybe one thing we also do know is it's hard for teams to find 2 of these guys.
Okay.
If you have 2 lottery tickets and even if one of them's a swing tackle, that's a valuable asset in the NFL. At some point when the tackle goes down, like you have a tradable asset or somebody that can play for you. So it is still a premium position. I think, people talk about left tackles, but guys have been lining up all over the place for years now that you really have to try to solidify both bookends, and it's hard. Not a lot of teams have 2 good tackles. So filling it in isn't the worst strategy. I think teams are struggling to have the 2. So, you took 2 lottery tickets on it. Hopefully that does actually increase your odds and one of these guys pans out because you're going to have to keep Josh. The way these edge rushers are now, it's almost this year you didn't have one of these crazy premium guys, but think about the past 3-4 drafts with the type of crazy premium.
Wait till week 4 when we play Washington.
Yeah, dude. You got to have guys that are athletic like that can keep up with these guys and keep them off Josh because these edge rushers are just – it's the type of athlete that's coming along the NFL defensive line is just terrifying.
Yeah. I'd like one of those terrifying people someday.
Chase Young scares the out of me.
Well, and you want to know what? I'm saying that. That's the shot they took on a Gregory Rousseau is 6'7", 265, crazy high-end, potential. That's what they're hoping they found, is that they stumbled on a guy late that they can turn into that. So moving on to our 3rd pick on the offensive side of the ball, I want to give a shout-out to our man Sal Capaccio over at WGR. He has said commonly that what the Bills really need is Isaiah McKenzie, but with a turbo button. And that made me chuckle. That's what Marcus Stevenson is. The Bills drafted Marcus Stevenson, receiver out of Houston, had 3 return touchdowns in the past 2 seasons here, best season and a half, and is one of those guys you've talked about it a lot. That hey, careful with the pro days with these 40 times and seeing guys, watch them play and see if they have translatable speed on the field. I couldn't find a single clip where Marcus Stevenson was not the fastest player on the field. He had that crazy second acceleration mid-play where he'd get the ball and a guy had the angle and he would just say, nope, you're not catching me, and would take off mid-play that looked like a 4-2, 4-3 guy on the field. And that, reports were that he was consistently running in the low 4.3s, and then it was a windy day on the day of Houston's pro day, and he was really upset that he ran a 4.45. So I'd love to be upset that I ran a 4.45.
Yeah, right.
But you could see he's one that when you watched him on the field, that was not some, helpful trigger finger of a guy at the combine. Like, he legit is fast, and you could see it translate on the field. I don't know how good of a wide receiver he is. I saw a lot of fly routes. I saw a lot of slant routes. I saw a lot of bubble screens. I did not see a lot of nuance in his route tree. But right now, what we need is a guy who can come in and be a bigger, faster version of Isaiah McKenzie and push him to compete for that returner gadget guy role. And then if we can develop him into more, that's great. But I like the fact that we now have a little insurance with that jet sweep gadget return guy role, that our worst case scenario with McKenzie and we practice squad Stevenson, or if we stumbled onto something with Stevenson, we have 4 years of a rookie contract locked into that role, and he's a little bit bigger and a little bit faster.
Yeah, this is a interesting. There's one role, like you said, it's like this gadget return guy role. Hopefully they don't have to again utilize 2 roster spots for this going forward. That wouldn't like that scenario where it's say both.
I hope it's Stevenson versus McKenzie, not Stevenson and McKenzie.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I don't want that. And those aren't the only 2 competing for this job either. They got the Falcons,
Brandon Powell,
and then a guy that was returning kicks for the Packers. They brought in.
Yeah, I'm not saying for a workout. Yeah. Plus, I think Matt Breida legitimately is going to be in there. And I say this 90% jokingly, but legitimately, Christian Wade's going to compete for that role. I don't believe that he's going to make it, but he is going to be in that competition.
He will field some kicks at training
camp.
Correct.
He will get reps in there, but it's going to be like a 6-man competition. But those 2 are for sure the leaders in the clubhouse.
Sure, and I think as soon as they re-signed Isaiah McKenzie, I said people were glad to have him back. I said this guy's job's not safe, right? Like there's nothing that prevents the Bills from moving on from him, and I think this draft pick proves that. I think they went out in free agency and tried to add a little bit of depth for that competition. I think that told you all you need to know about the safety of Isaiah McKenzie's role in this team. So this is a battle I can't wait to look forward to in camp.
Might be one of my favorites for camp.
Sure. It's going to be up there. This one's going to be fun. I don't want to root against Isaiah McKenzie because I like him and I want him on the team. But as a fan of the team, I have to root for the rookie and the rookie deal and having that controlled cost. But we'll see, because the speed's fun. I agree with you. It does pop every time you watch this guy. Yeah. Speed doesn't always translate in the NFL, and that's always my problem with RAS scores and stuff, is that these traits and these things don't always translate in the NFL. We've seen a number of times. With the type of speed guy that he is and the lack of necessary route running that we've seen from him, I usually get worried about those kind of guys when it's a Marquise Goodwin or a John Ross body type guy, and you just – all there is a track athlete. I don't think that's what you're getting here. You're getting
Stevenson's
a football player.
Like he's built well.
He has a football player's body, a running back type body. I think that he can handle that well. So this is an interesting one to me. I think he's going to have a leg up on this competition because of the rookie, just the sheer fact of being a rookie and having that controlled cost. I think it's going to be his battle to lose. I think this summer, if he can't field punts or is mistake prone, I think that's the only way. And he still is, even though he's got that speed where he was picked, like there's a chance that he could get stashed on the practice squad on this team. We talk about every year that some of these guys are going to get stashed. He is a potential for that, where you allow him to develop while McKenzie has that role. I'm totally fine with Isaiah McKenzie having that role going into 2021, man. I had no problems with him being part of this team. I didn't before the draft. I don't now. But it's definitely a battle that I'll be keeping a close eye on at camp this summer, because I think it's an important one.
And it's one I think Ron was talking about in the chat here, that the Bills have an incredibly deep roster, and it's going to be tough to make this roster. But I saw a tweet earlier from Jay Skursky that was kind of a good wake-up call. The last 3 years, the Bills have, 20-plus draft picks. I think it's 23 draft picks in the last 3 years. One hasn't made the roster, and it's Austin Proehl. Voshon Joseph got IR'd beforehand, and Isaiah Hodgins made the roster and then got put on IR. But 22 out of 23 draft picks have made this roster, the opening 53, and the only one that didn't was Austin Proehl.
Some of that's hard, though.
I think that's going to be harder this year. Right. It's going to be harder this year.
We had one of the worst rosters in football in the history of the NFL on offense one year. On 18. So, that's tough because –
Funny, that's the year that one of the rookies did make it.
Right. Yeah, and so I think there are scenarios from a depth perspective. But I'll tell you, man, this is one of the weird things about the draft. This is more of a big view of the draft. All leading up to it, I was something for let's leave with 4 picks. Like I don't think you're going to be able to get out of here with 7. That was my thing. You're not going to leave with 7, and all these guys are going to make the roster. But now looking at this draft class, I don't think they'll all make the roster, but I think there's scenarios that it's totally plausible.
Jack Anderson was already snapping at the first mini camp, so they're already looking at that versatility to give him a shot. We'll get to him in a moment, but I think Stevenson was right there with Hamlin as one of my favorite picks in this draft, where I like the upside. I love the story of Isaiah McKenzie. It's easy to root for a dude who's probably the shortest wide receiver in the NFL. I know they try to say he's 5'7". I don't even know if he's 5'7". I think he plays in the 160s when he plays, and he's real quick and is fun. And then he's great off the field. He's very charismatic. He's a good-looking, fun, happy guy that they love to put on social media, and he's a great sport about all of it. And I think that makes it seem that his popularity and value to the team is higher. But what we all need to pay attention to is the Bills could have tendered him and didn't. They let him be a free agent. They let him sit out there for multiple days. I know the story was fun that he said if they paid him in candy, he'd come back. But the truth is, if another team offered him more than the minimum contract, he would have taken it.
Right.
He didn't turn down, serious money from another team to come back to the Bills for the minimum. He didn't turn down multi-year deals from other teams to come back for a 1-year minimum contract. And Bean showed that they brought him back for a 1-year minimum contract. He gave Levi Wallace more than the minimum to come back. He gave Tywan Jones more than the minimum to come back.
Right.
He tendered Ike Botker to bring him back. There were other guys that he paid more than that amount of money. So I like the story. I won't be upset at all if Isaiah McKenzie makes this team. But as of right now, I think it's Marquez Stevenson who's going to win that role, and I think it's Marquez Stevenson instead of Isaiah McKenzie, and I think it's Isaiah Hodgins who takes the 6th wide receiver role, or the 5th wide receiver role, with Stevenson being 6th, because I think it's Stevenson versus McKenzie.
Yeah, Hodgins is going to be probably up there also with that battle for that McKenzie-Stevenson role. Hodgins is going to be one of these, because I there's like this small sect of Twitter that is always telling me how good this guy is going to be, and he has some fun stuff from his college tape. We just didn't see, I think he got drowned out by Gabe Davis. I know he had some nice stuff, but then the injury happened. We just didn't see it. And training camp was weird last year. OTAs were weird. I can't wait to see this kid, rehabbed and participating, because, if he comes on in any sort of form like a Gabe Davis did, then definitely I think he's going to solidify that spot. And I think that this is a really interesting room to watch, because, again, we talk about the type of room for some young guys to come into. You're coming into a room with, Emmanuel Sanders, Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, some of the most filthy footwork in the league. These guys are great communicators. They understand the game of football. There might not be a better room league-wide at any position for a group of young guys to come in with a giant notebook and just take notes for a year or two and learn from some of the best in the NFL. Chad Hall, too, one of the better coaches, a wide receiver coach. This is a great setup.
Got a lot of buzz for maybe a OC
totally
kind of hype.
Yeah, the players love him. They love playing for him. So this is, in my opinion, and I know this is going to come off as some homer bias, this might be the best room for some young guys to come in and develop. There's really not a ton of pressure. Gabe Davis, I think, has to continue to produce, but there's not a ton of pressure on the rest of these guys to come in and produce, and they get to learn from the best in the business. It's an amazing opportunity for these kids.
Yeah, and I mean, Ron's joking here about Jake Kumaro and the way
he got
that
Aaron Rodgers fired. We can't cut him.
But yeah, obviously we can. Maybe we could trade him back to the Packers. But you look at this overall room, and you're talking about guys who were impactful on other rosters who are now the Bills' 9th and 10th receivers. So we already talked about McKenzie versus Stevenson and Hodgins versus Kumaro, and Brandon Powell was a contributor for the Falcons. And I know Duke Williams obviously is what he is, but he's a fringe NFL roster guy. He's now like the 11th receiver on the Bills' depth chart that that's the kind of depth we're talking about. Is a guy who might be able to make an NFL roster.
That was like our hopes and prayers were resting on Duke Williams for like 4 months one year.
And he had the most. The man had the most targets in an NFL playoff game for the Bills, and now he's our 11th receiver. It just shows how far this roster has come. Totally. So I'm excited about where it is. I am a believer in Marcus Stevenson, and I do think right now maybe it's 55-45. I don't think it's
I saw him out there fielding punts on the Instagram. So he's coming. You know, Mackenzie saw that.
Well, and that is the key for him. I think he's by far the best kick returner on the team. He was one of the best kick returners in college football. 3 touchdowns in the past, I think, 12 games of returning kickoffs. He has returned punts, but not as much as he returned kicks. So that's really where it's going to come down to is can he show sure hands, sure fielding of the ball, and be a trusted punt returner. If he can do that, I think that solidifies it right now. Just like you said, what we've seen and not seen with Isaiah Hodgins, we've seen Isaiah McKenzie field punts. He was bad at it, and he was terrible at it in Denver. He was bad at it his first year in Buffalo, and then he was okay in a very brief glimpse last year. We don't know if that's going to translate to him being good now, but we haven't even seen Stevenson do it in a couple years. He did it as a freshman and sophomore with Houston in brief duty. But that's going to be the one. So watch for more Instagram videos of him fielding punts and him fielding punts cleanly, and we'll feel better about that one as it goes.
Yep.
The last pick here was Jack Anderson, which is a guy who played right guard consistently for Texas Tech, and looks like the love child of Richie Incognito. Has kind of a happy-go-lucky face with arm sleeve tattoos down both arms.
Yeah, Sons of Anarchy look.
And is a guy that talked about having center potential, but only ever played right guard for Texas Tech. I guess he played some center in high school, and now in the first minicamp, they had him working at center. So his only path to a roster spot is showing versatile interior offensive line depth. I think he's the kind of guy that early on is more likely for that Ike Botker route of practice squad, call up, but probably inactive on game day, that kind of path of development. But was a guy who I think, was good value to get that late in the 7th round. He was a guy a lot of people thought would be an earlier day 3 pick. I don't think he has a ton of upside or is some future starter, but if he can be future valuable interior depth, that's something. That's not nothing.
Right.
But I don't know that I see a ton of excitement coming from Jack Anderson in the future, and I think he's going to have to fight to even get a roster spot.
Yeah, I think this, to me, screams practice squad. Same type of thing you said, it kind of maybe he can fill out that role, learn from some of these guys, and be a call-up at some point. But, it'll be nice if he can learn to hone in on some of that versatility. I think that they like those John Feliciano roles. I think they like having those guys kind of in their system, so maybe they can groom another John Feliciano for themselves here coming up for the next couple of years. But, I don't expect anything anytime soon out of that pick. And you shouldn't when your team is as good as the Bills are when you're picking that late in the draft, that this guy's just going to be lucky to get a paycheck from the NFL, to be on this roster or on the practice squad. So.
And I will say one of the biggest pivots as Bills fans and as people who, try to intelligently report on the Bills and cover the team on our show, we spent a lot of years closely tracking that UDFA battle right after the draft. And, oh, my gosh, are they in on this guy? And, oh, did you hear they got Tyree Jackson?
Davrick Rogers, baby.
Oh, yeah. And Brandon Riley. Oh, we got Brandon Riley. I can't lie. I don't really care who they signed as UDFAs because ain't none of those guys making the team.
No.
But I will go through and just share. Obviously I was pumped that Warren G's son made the team because I like regulators as much as anybody. Quentin Morris is a big athletic tight end who is there and kind of in a Reggie Gilliam type role. He's a little bit more of a bigger inline guy than the H-back fullback type that Gilliam is. Trey Walker, receiver out of San Jose State, who had a ton of production at San Jose State, just a crazy amount of stats in that high flying offense that they play out there. And then, Cyrus Tutele out of Fresno State was a guy that actually a fair amount of people thought could get drafted, but another 6'6", 318-pound tackle. So obviously they care a lot about the size and the length at tackle. God bless him. Happy to have him there at camp. Looking forward to, them getting their moment to put on the uniform and take some pictures and get some film out there. And, maybe one of them does make an impression enough to make the practice squad, which is really what their path is going to be right now, is getting themselves to that point where they can make a practice squad. But, good for them. And I wish them all the best. I don't know that I see any shining stars here. I think, for as much hype as, Elijah Griffin's father got him, he probably also has the best path of maybe an outside shot at something, just because there's not a ton of depth at corner. But any of the offensive guys, I didn't see anyone screaming at me that, oh, this is a guy who's going to fight for a roster spot.
No, I think you're fighting for, like, the practice squad, and even at the cornerback. I think maybe you're battling with a Cam Lewis type of guy, where you're trying to upgrade that bottom of the roster youth practice squad and say, I can get 2 years younger here and continue to develop. The development hasn't peaked where we wanted it with this other young guy. We're going to get a little bit younger here and get a new development guy in. But that's really what you're shuffling the bottom of the deck. But Bean loves shuffling that bottom of the roster.
Competition everywhere.
Yeah, I won't be shocked if a guy or two impresses them enough to move one of the names that we just always assume is going to be on the practice squad and move those guys out. I think, we're talking about guys, again, bottom of the roster, NFL talent. This is all sort of interchangeable. So it's going to be a preference thing. If a guy comes in and buys into the process and really puts it together this summer, some of these guys can probably swing in on the practice squad. But yeah, I don't expect anyone to blow anyone away and be the next big undrafted free agent impact player for the Bills, but hopefully.
Yeah, you never know.
Right? Yeah.
Last show on the defensive side of the ball, we really had some good discussion on the available free agents, and
some have gone since, right? Casey
Hayward did, but whether Steven Nelson, Richard Sherman are still out there, Jarrell Casey's
Bills
still
were
out
supposedly one of 14 teams in on Steven Nelson.
Correct.
Since we last
they have
talked.
touched base with him there. So on the offensive side of the ball, it's maybe not quite as exciting. I know you were an advocate for Najee Harris or a running back early on, making sense. Now that they didn't, are you kind of stand pat, or would you like to see them kick the tires on a Todd Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, Duke Johnson type?
Yeah, it's weird. We were talking a little bit off air here about this, because I don't necessarily agree with what you said about the offense. I think that the offensive free agency at this point is probably similar talent-wise to the defensive side of the ball. It's just that the Bills' floor of their own depth chart is high on the offensive side of the ball. There isn't any glaring need where you look at the offensive free agency and the guys that available are much better. There's any type of improvement, where I think on the defensive side of the ball, we see at least at cornerback, there's known improvement available in free agency. But I think some of the names are intriguing other years as Bill fans. You asked about running back. Other years, I would take a number of these guys. Sorry, not for swearing like that, but just 4 months ago, I was in on Le'Veon Bell, right? I was pounding the table 5-6 months ago for the Bills to get Le'Veon Bell. We knew there was interest then. So some of these names are intriguing. But yeah, no, I think Brandon Beane has done such a good job filling up the depth of this roster and, filling the holes going into the draft, that none of the names that are out there seem to be a improvement from where this roster is at running back. Or obviously we just talked about the youth development guys at wide receiver. I don't see anyone right now in free agency at wide receiver that does anything for me that upgrades that room in any way. I think tight end, there's probably a couple guys we can talk about there, and then maybe a couple on the offensive line. That's about it.
Yeah, at tight end, I do think there's a little bit there, and obviously we had Jesse James in for a visit already. I think that guys like Trey Burton and Richard Rodgers are in a very similar vein as Jesse James. Bigger guys, maybe a little more athletic than Lee Smith was. No one's going to be the blocker Lee Smith was. He was the best blocking tight end in the NFL. That you're not going to replace that. But they're good blockers. I don't know that there's anyone here that I see as an upgrade. I don't know that there's anyone here that I see pushing Dawson Knox for his starting job. But I wouldn't be. I do think Jesse James, Trey Burton, or Richard Rodgers would be an upgrade over Reggie Gilliam as a third tight end. And that
I still like Tyler Eifert.
Yeah, honestly, if you're going to take a shot on upside, a guy that hasn't been able to stay healthy, but when he stays healthy, he's better than all those three guys I listed. So that's as much of a shot as anything. You give him a chance to stay healthy and see what he can do.
Yeah, 1 year small prove a deal, another one,
Yeah.
get him into camp, see if you can have a healthy season out of him. If not, who cares? I think you're still in the same position you were going into it. Obviously, not a free agent. I think probably people would like an update on Ertz and maybe some of your ideas if a move could get swung for an Ertz and what that would cost at this point. Now that we're past that draft and what we're looking at, what are you thinking about the Ertz watch that's been going on for 2.5 months now?
So obviously, to some extent, Howie Roseman lost his game of chicken that he said he was going to get a third round pick
all the time.
and that you hold out strong, saying I'm going to be able to get this value.
Everyone holding their cryptocurrency.
Our thoughts and prayers with all the crypto people this morning. I do think that there comes a point where it doesn't really make a ton of sense for them to hold him any longer. Obviously, Dallas Goedert is the future at tight end there. They're rebuilding. They're stockpiling future assets. They already traded down to get future picks and then traded down again to get more future picks. I don't know. Howie Roseman is historically famous for being stubborn. So maybe he just holds him and just keeps him. Richard asking here about the post-June 1st. The NFL allows teams to release guys and designate them as post-June 1st if you want. You don't have to wait until literally June 1st to release them. So there's no reason you need to do that. The same thing some people have asked, why is asking about Mario Addison. You don't need to wait. They could do that now. There's no benefit to doing that. You can cut him at the 53-man cutdown day and get the same cap benefit as you would. So you never know when injuries are going to happen.
Have a body for training camp.
Yeah, so that's the difference between Philadelphia and Buffalo. Philadelphia is rebuilding. Philadelphia is stockpiling for the future. Getting reps for a younger player makes sense to get rid of them. The Bills, there's no benefit to that. What if somebody gets hurt? What if we have two defensive ends get hurt? And man, I wish we had kept Mario Addison. There's no benefit to that. If they want to cut him at cutdown day, you can, and you get the same cap benefit. There's no reason to hurry and do that now. We don't get any extra money. We can wait and do it then and get the same amount of money. The Eagles already could do that with Zach Ertz. I think they've now gotten to the point where they're not going to be able to trade his contract. I think the $8 million and change is too much, or he has not been willing to renegotiate that contract to the acquiring team. We don't know which one is which. I do still think there's genuine interest. I do think if he gets released, the Bills are going to have tough competition with Frank Reich and Carson Wentz calling for him in Indy. And I know Bills fans will say, "Oh, but the Bills are better." They're a little bit better. We played him in the playoffs. They're a good team, and Carson Wentz was described as his best friend, and that Frank Reich was his coach for a long time. That's going to be a tough draw to compete against. But right now,
LA, I think, is another tough one. He's from California.
His wife plays professionally out there for the women's soccer league there. So I do think that that's our best path. I think that Zach Ertz getting released and then wanting to sign on with the best team possible to make a playoff run. The Bills make a pitch. Playing with Josh Allen makes a ton of sense, and it certainly is a spot where he'd come in and be the starter day one. I like it. I'm not against Dawson Knox, but Zach Ertz would be the starter immediately day one. He would be the starting tight end. That's our best hope, is that he wants to come there. I don't think it makes sense to trade for him now, because I obviously don't think he's going to restructure his contract. So signing him to some, similar Emmanuel Sanders deal that has some void years in the future that brings him in for a low $2 or $3 million on cap hit this year is probably the best case scenario. And he's better than any of the available free agents. He's better than Jesse James. He's better than Tyler Eifert. He's better than Richard Rodgers or Trey Burton. He would actually be an upgrade. Everybody else would be depth that's an upgrade over Reggie Gilliam, not an upgrade over Dawson Knox.
Yeah, I'd be for it at this point. It's not something I'm pounding the table for. I need to happen. And I think Brandon Beane holds all the cards in that. They don't need to get in a bidding war with Indy. They don't need to get in a bidding war with the Chargers. Like
We can't. Not only don't we not need to, we can't. They can outbid us if they want to.
Totally. And Bean has no interest in that, I don't think. I think that he's happy with this team the way it is. I think he's filled it the way he wants. Talking about Addison contract, I think he'd be happy to roll with Mario Addison this year. And I think that he's, in his mind, written that check. And if it doesn't work out, I think he's learned a lesson from Trent Murphy. But we're going to get the full off season here this year for him to be able to actually make that decision. But I think in their perfect scenario, they're going to pay Addison along with rookie.
He already took a pay cut. He already gave us back a chunk of money to be able to stay on this team. And who was the first guy he talked about in the press conference after the Rousseau and Basham pick was, Mario Addison was already on the phone with me about working with the guys, and we're so excited to have a mentor like Mario in the locker room.
Right.
That tells you all you need to know.
Exactly.
Some of the final pieces here on the offensive line, there's maybe a couple things. So although it was, hey, we didn't take anybody at running back, but I don't really want Todd Gurley or Le'Veon Bell. I don't think they add anything to the room. We already have competition at returner. So, I guess maybe Tavon Austin, but I don't know. Farrell Cooper. I think we're fine with the guys we have. At offensive line, if you told me tomorrow we signed Trey Turner, I don't know that I'd be upset. I think he's one of the only pieces I could see that could come in and genuinely push for a starting spot, and then we trade one of the other guys. But I don't know that Forrest Lamp is a ton different than that.
I was going to say, I think
Forrest Lamp started 16 games for the Chargers last year.
I think it's very similar to Lamp in that it's a name we recognize from doing draft scouting and keep paying attention to guys. So he's got a name that's recognizable, but I don't know that he comes in and there's any improvement to the room or benefit to the depth. I'm all for bringing in more big bodies, and then if he beats out some of those guys, great. But again, none of these names, I think, raise the floor of your bottom of your roster even. So there's nothing that I have to, have in my building before training camp that's calling for the Bills as a big fit or anything.
Yeah. If we hadn't have taken 2 offensive tackles, I was interested in a Rick Wagner or a Dennis Kelly or someone like that as a swing tackle. But we took 2 offensive tackles, so I'm pretty sure that's not going to be the case either. So I don't see a lot of paths for a free agent on the offensive side. I do think the highest likelihood is tight end. Matter of fact, I'll even go out on a limb further. I think we add a tight end. I don't know how big of a name it'll be, but a Jesse James, Richard Rodgers, Trey Burton, and then, of course, the possibility of Zach Ertz. I do think we add a veteran tight end who has a shot at that tight end 2, tight end 3 role in the locker room, or Ertz coming in and pushing Knox down to tight end 2 and Hollister down to tight end 3. As opposed to on the defensive side where there are some names out there that could come in and contribute. We just don't know if we can afford them, like a Steven Nelson, like a Jarrell Casey, guys like that, or Richard Sherman, guys who for sure could come in and compete and probably start, but I don't know if it depends how desperate they get and if their price range matches Bean's offer.
Right. Yep. So,
we've now wrapped up the offensive side of the ball. We're going to do one more draft show for you guys and have on Damon Talbot, who runs Draft Diamonds, one of the most knowledgeable guys in the business on the late round guys, and the UDFA is going to talk to him about some of those guys and his favorite guys as far as especially the day 3 picks and the guys that we've touched on here, and does a lot of work with those prospects and getting them exposure to the league and to their workouts and things like that. And then Aaron and I are going to pivot into our new realm of position previews and breaking down the roster and the structure of leading up from here to camp. And we want to give a little teaser for you guys. Got some exciting stuff coming here this summer with maybe some new additions to the Cover One team and some new things coming out, so keep your ears open. We're excited and got some fun stuff going on in the works behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm getting pretty excited for this off season here, and things are opening up a little bit in New York, so maybe we'll be able to do a show live together at some point here in 2021. That'd be kind of fun. Maybe get down to Uncle Jumbo's and have some vodka drinks and kick up a live show here.
Set up a table and a camera.
The weather's nice in Western New York. Get some wings and some Uncle Jumbo's and do it up right now that we're getting a little bit more back to normal.
I can't wait. It's going to be really fun, man, and I'm looking forward to it. I hope everybody listening is healthy and happy and safe and doing well. Make sure you guys are going out wherever you're listening to this show. Give us a like, give us a rating, give us a review, subscribe to the channel. It really makes a big difference. It means a lot. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Subscribe to us on iTunes, on Google Podcasts, wherever you're listening. Subscribe to it. Tell some other people about it. Aaron, where can the good people find your works?
You can find me at Aaron Quinn 716 and every Wednesday night here with Greg Thompson doing this.
Absolutely. Come and find me on Twitter at Greg Thompson, having a good time, trying to go back and forth with Bills fans, having fun. But thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening to us tonight. On behalf of Aaron Quinn, I'm Greg Thompson. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.